How's it going, everybody? Adrian Simple here from the Gaming Observer, and welcome to the Sunday Variety Show for February 10th, 2019. We're going to start today off with my thoughts on the latest news of Metro Exodus going over to the Epic Store and all of the fallout from that. Then we're going to move on to some updates on both the Observer and my life. And finally, we'll have a Q&A segment. I really wanted to fit in a history segment this week, just like I've been meaning to for the past 2 weeks, but that's still on hold. I have a friend who recommended a game to me, and she was so excited about it. So I actually invited her onto the show, so now it's a matter of scheduling. But anyway, let's get into this, shall we? Alright, so something I want to do here today is talk about the recent debacle going on with Metro Exodus, because I really feel like there are a lot of very strong opinions here that I am disagreeing with. And maybe this is just what I'm seeing on Reddit, but it's worth exploring regardless. Let me be clear here, in the daily updates I try to keep everything fact-based, but what you're about to hear is a full-on editorial. So if you don't know, a few weeks back it was announced that Metro Exodus would only be available on the Epic Games Store, and that they would fulfill Steam pre-orders on Steam. People went crazy about this. They called for boycotts, they review-bombed the other games, and they called it anti-consumer. Then a frustrated developer from 4A Games came out and said, hey, if you don't care enough about Metro to follow us to Epic, then you weren't even a customer in the first place. And he also said this, which is from Google Translate, quote, if all the PC players announced a boycott of the Metro, then the next Metro, if there is one, is definitely not on PC. Better or worse, decide for yourself, end quote. And my god, people went ballistic about this. I mean, there was so much anger, insults being thrown left and right, both towards the guy who made the comment, as well as people who weren't even involved. And there was even another group who put on like this apathetic vibe as well, you know, saying that they have other games to choose from anyway, they never cared about Exodus in the first place, and so on. So let's dive into this. I want to talk about this developer's comments here because I personally really feel like there's at least some form of misinterpretation happening. If you read his comments, his full comments, he really comes across as frustrated, right? He talks about how hard everyone worked, that he loves the game, and now all of a sudden people are throwing a fit just because this game is on a new launcher. You can see where he's coming from here. And many people took his comment about not being on PC for the next game as a threat, right? Don't boycott our game or else you'll never have the game again. And when you read his comments, I really don't feel like that's what he's saying, or at the very least there isn't enough information to specifically determine that. From my perspective, it's more of a reality that he is outlining. If the PC version underperforms because you're boycotting, that doesn't mean we're gonna just do what you want. It means you simply won't have the opportunity to buy it at all, because it's not worth it for us to support a PC version. Simple as that. I've talked to a few people about this, including a friend of mine, Ben, and he made a great point that this developer's comments were by no means helpful. And while review bombing games is a bad response, many people feel like it's their only way to raise attention to an issue. Essentially, this is a beast that he created himself, and it's important to remember that as well. Sure, I can argue that what he is saying technically is in the right, but that doesn't mean it is wise to say it in the first place. The other big issue that people have is with the Epic Games Store itself, both feature-wise and with this whole exclusivity thing. And let me say this, there are a whole whackload of people that just don't think there are enough features with Epic that warrant them to get the platform. Others are uncomfortable with the data leak that they had. These are totally fine reasons to not join the Epic ecosystem. Hell, if you just don't want the inconvenience of a second launcher, I have no problem with that. Where it becomes an issue for me personally is when you start claiming anti-consumerism. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not an expert on this topic by any means, but I am struggling to find how a game exclusively going to a new platform is anti-consumer when one has no investment in either the game or the platform. All that is being taken away is the opportunity to play a video game that was never bought into in the first place, and one is certainly not entitled to something that they never bought into. Just play something else. When it comes to this, the other thing that I struggle with is this idea that if it's not on Steam, it's anti-consumer. Isn't a monopoly on the market just as bad? Does a game have to be on Steam and something else in order to make it pro-consumer? What if it were on Epic and Origin at the same time? These are all things that are worth exploring. There are some legitimate concerns, of course. People who pre-ordered physical editions will be given an Epic code instead of a Steam code, which was advertised at the time of purchase. This is a valid issue. Some have mentioned that exclusivity deals could be a slippery slope to things like games you have bought being transferred to other platforms because they struck a new deal. This is a valid potential issue. But it is hard to parse those legitimate concerns when you have people that are also claiming anti-consumerism because having multiple launchers open at once takes up too much RAM on their computer. Anyway, I'm done ranting, but thank you for allowing me to do that. It is unlikely that anything is going to come of this controversy anyway. I'm just fascinated at what I saw on the internet over the past week. If you have any comments of your own about this, I do encourage you to reach out because I am interested in what you have to say. The Observer is going pretty steady right now. Viewership has pretty much stabilized since the Christmas surge, so at this point it's just a matter of waiting it out until the next big event. As for what that event will be, I'm not entirely sure. I do have something in the works right now, which is actually pretty huge, but I don't know what the timeline is on that yet. I've also been trying to experiment with getting myself on the Google Home. See, if I actually just made an independent app, and all it did was give you the latest update, it might actually work. People could put it in their routines, and while it wouldn't get looped into their news briefs, they could at least access it in some way, so that might be a significant step. The only other thing that I can really begin doing is advertising and networking, and I haven't done a whole lot of that because I'm really wanting to overhaul my graphic design first, but I've been talking about that for so long. It's really time to get started on that. Regardless, like I said, things are going steady. I put out my first game report a few weeks ago, kind of as a test run. It went pretty well, but I'm not sure that the format I put together is something I want to stick with. I think I'm better suited to industry news, not subjective responses to video games, so we'll see what happens with that. Otherwise, not much has changed this week other than the fact that I had to take a few days off. I played a few games this week. Well, kind of. Mostly, I've been playing Apex Legends, which is just such a fantastic battle royale, and in my opinion, the best one to come out so far. I've been having a blast, both in solo queues, and I just recently got to play with some friends, which honestly didn't even feel all that different. The ping system in this game is so good that I don't even feel disconnected from the people I'm playing with, short of some greedy players who just want to do their own thing. Regardless, I've been all over it, and I still cannot wait to play it some more. Other than Apex, I picked up some games from the Steam Lunar sale. The first was the War of the Chosen DLC for XCOM 2, which I've literally been waiting to buy since the day it came out. And the other one is Divinity Original Sin, which I've always wanted to play, but I really think I'd have a better time going through it co-op, so maybe I'll have to find someone to play it with. Anyway, I actually got started with War of the Chosen, but I had to troubleshoot a lot because I really wanted to play with, quite a few mods, and it takes some work to get that going correctly. But I'm fine with waiting. I loved the game so much the first time that I played through it, so I can't wait to actually have new stories and new characters all over again. To be honest though, I definitely put it on hold multiple times just so I could play Apex Legends. Alright, we'll do a bit of a Q&A here. This question comes in from Sammy, who asks if I will be making a fan Discord for the community. So right now, I've actually given my Discord server exclusive access to my Patreon supporters, starting at the $3 tier. Essentially, for the price of a cup of coffee, you can come chat with me and hang out with the gang. Now, I'm totally understanding of the fact that not everyone can contribute or necessarily wants to, and that's totally cool. But for now, I think the Discord specifically will be staying behind Patreon, because there aren't really very many incentives I can offer my patrons right now, and that's one of the big ones. Also, as I grow larger, I'm not really interested in having a ton of people inside of a server. I've joined those before, even via Patreon, and I always feel so out of place. So I'm hoping to keep it all tight-knit. That being said, I'm always going to be open to other options. Of course, I've made myself available on Twitter and email, where I'm always giving direct responses to people. Perhaps the best option in terms of interacting with a community, though, would be Reddit. So if you want to have a community over there, feel free to go to r/thegamingobserver. There's nothing there right now, but I could eventually seeing it as like the hub for the community. So anyway, thank you so much for reaching out, Sammy. Mando comes out with the big guns asking, quote, "It has already been confirmed by the University of York that there is no link between violence and video games with kids/teens, yet the media still uses it as a scapegoat. How do you feel about this every time the news brings this up?" And then as a follow-up question, he asks, what would it take for everyone to understand this false issue? This is an extraordinarily complex topic, so I'll give you my brief thoughts on it. It also just so happens that I'm going to be covering this in a school essay that I'm writing, so I figured I may as well turn that into a video at some point, so you'll hear about this from me in the future. Anyways, how do I feel when it's brought up in the news? Truthfully, I'm not as angered about it than you might expect. I really do feel like the reasons that people will point to are in some cases understandable. I mean, don't get me wrong, thus far the research has been on our side, and there's always going to be the argument that it is no worse than movies or music. But I always give some leeway to the people who say that it's worse once you put the controller in the hands and make the player commit violent actions. I understand the fear there. And hell, I would even posit that it could potentially accelerate violent individuals to do violent things. but so would movies, right? So it's just a matter of what that person prefers in their entertainment. Regardless, I think it's going to take a cultural shift in order to step away from those assumptions. Gaming really needs to be normalized in day-to-day culture before we can get to that point. Because really, if someone says they're going to stay in all day and watch Netflix, society shrugs. But if someone else says they're going to stay in all day to play video games, society scoffs. It's not until people are shrugging at both examples that we're going to be able to move on from that. And we're slowly getting there, I think, right? Like, Fortnite is doing wonders, so is virtual reality. I think that the only other way would be if there was some definitive evidence. You know, Mando mentioned the research published by York, and while it is a solid study, it's not necessarily definitive. There's still lots of researching and studying to do, and we're only ever going to have like a best guess at this topic. I want to thank you very much for that question, Mando, and keep an eye out in a few months when I'm likely going to make an even more in-depth video about it. Okay, well that's all for today. I want to thank you very much for tuning in to the show here on YouTube. If you haven't already, it would really help me out a ton if you could subscribe. I'm trying to get to 100 subscribers so that I have a custom URL, which will make it easier for people to get here. Other than that, I will catch you tomorrow for the daily gaming update. As always, this show was produced in part by Brandon, who subscribes to The Observer via Patreon. Thank you very much, have a super duper day, and happy gaming, everyone.